The forbidden truth of the Knights Templar. What the Church tried to hide for 700 years. For more than 700 years, a forbidden truth has been buried beneath the weight of cathedrals, sealed behind the silence of monarchs, and erased from the chronicles written by the Church itself. The story you are about to hear is not a tale of knights and battles. It is a revelation deliberately hidden from humanity. The Knights Templar were not destroyed because they were corrupt, nor because they were heretics. They were annihilated because they discovered something that terrified the Church, something that could have rewritten the very essence of Christianity as the world knew it. It all began in the early 12th century. 9 men bound by faith and secrecy made a sacred vow in Jerusalem. Led by Hugues de Payan, they pledged to protect Christian pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land. But behind this noble oath lay a deeper mission, one whispered about only in secret circles of historians and occult scholars. These knights were granted residence beneath the ruins of Solomon's Temple, a site that had witnessed the presence of kings, prophets, and mysteries lost to time. For 9 long years, the knights excavated the sacred grounds, emerging from the shadows with newfound power, knowledge, and influence that no one could explain. Soon after, their order began to rise in ways that defied logic. In just a few decades, they went from poor warriors to the wealthiest and most influential organization in the known world. They invented the world's first banking system, built fortresses across continents, and answered only to the Pope himself. Kings borrowed from them, empires depended on them, and yet amid their growing influence, they guarded a secret that could shake heaven itself. Legends spoke of relics, scrolls, artifacts, or perhaps a revelation that the Templars had discovered beneath the Temple of Solomon. Something that questioned the Church's greatest claim, the exclusive authority to interpret divine truth. But absolute power invites absolute fear. By the 1300s, King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the order, saw in their destruction a way to erase his obligation. The Church, threatened by their independence, saw an opportunity to reclaim dominance. Together, they conspired. On the cold morning of October 13, 1307, the Templars were hunted down like traitors, arrested in a single coordinated strike across France, accused of worshipping false gods and practicing dark rituals. Under torture, they confessed to crimes they never committed, their screams echoing through the dungeons of Paris. Their leaders were burned alive, their temples seized, their names erased. But what truly died in those flames was not a group of knights. It was the truth they carried. Whispers survived, in symbols carved into cathedrals, in coded manuscripts, in secret brotherhoods that rose centuries later. From the Freemasons to the Rosicrucians, the Templar legacy endured, hiding in plain sight. Some say they preserved sacred writings that told a different story of Christ, a story the Church could never allow to surface. Others claim they found the Holy Grail, not as a cup, but as a truth that mankind was never meant to possess. Whatever it was powerful enough to make kings tremble and popes conspire. Tonight, we will open the gates of the past and reveal what was forbidden for 7 centuries. The reason the Church feared them, the knowledge they protected, and how their influence still shapes our world today. This is not just history, it is a confession buried in time, a truth that refused to die, the truth of the Knights Templar. The origins of the Knights Templar lie in an era when faith and conquest walked hand in hand, when the sword and the cross were instruments of divine ambition. The year was 1119. The Crusades had already drenched the Holy Land in blood, and Christian pilgrims risked their lives crossing deserts infested with thieves and fanatics. Amid that chaos, 9 knights made a vow before God in Jerusalem. They called themselves Pauperes Commilitones Christi Templici Salomonici, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. They swore to protect the innocent, defend the sacred, and live a life of purity and poverty. But in the silence of their oath, another mission was whispered, a mission not written in papal decrees or royal letters. These men were seekers, drawn not only by faith, but by the magnetic pull of something buried beneath the ancient stones of the Temple Mount. The world they entered was filled with relics, mysteries, and forbidden texts that predated Christianity itself. Hidden chambers, scrolls sealed in wax, and symbols carved by civilizations long forgotten. Jerusalem was not only a battlefield, it was a library of the divine and the profane. The Templars' residence within the ruins of Solomon's Temple was no coincidence. Ancient Jewish traditions spoke of secret knowledge hidden there, blueprints of creation, relics of divine power, or even records of a bloodline that the church would do anything to conceal. What began as a mission of protection soon became an expedition of discovery. And when the knights emerged years later, they were no longer poor, humble soldiers. They were men who carried something unseen, something that gave them influence beyond understanding. By the time they returned to Europe, their reputation had transformed from a handful of zealots into living legends. Nobles bowed before them, popes blessed their order, and kingdoms opened their coffers in gratitude. They built fortresses across continents, designed with geometric precision that mirrored the patterns of the stars. Their banner, the red cross on a white mantle, became a symbol of both fear and faith. But behind their ascension lay an uncomfortable question. What had changed these men? How did they go from guardians of pilgrims to architects of power? The church claimed divine favor. Others whispered of hidden relics, sacred relics unearthed beneath Solomon's temple that granted wisdom, foresight, or even forbidden truth. To the common man, the Templars were heroes. To kings, they were rivals. And to the church, they were an enigma. Holy servants who did not bow, rich monks who owed no taxes, warriors who feared no man. Their independence was a miracle and a threat. Within a century, they controlled not only armies, but also trade routes, gold reserves, and even the secrets of alchemy and architecture. They had created something unprecedented, a global network of faith and finance that operated beyond the reach of any throne or papal decree. And while their influence grew, so did the unease of those in power. The church began to question what fueled their rise. Were they truly servants of God, or had they become masters of something else, something the church could not name without admitting its own fear? Legends began to spread, rumors of secret rituals, of arcane symbols, of a hidden truth passed from night to night beneath torchlight in stone chambers. The people called it blasphemy. The scholars called it enlightenment, and the church called it heresy. It was only a matter of time before holiness turned to suspicion, and devotion became damnation. The Templars' golden age was just beginning, but so was the plot that would destroy them. The year was 1119, and the sands of Jerusalem still carried the scent of blood from the Crusades. The Holy Land was a mosaic of ruins and relics, haunted by the ghosts of empires and martyrs. Amid that fragile peace, 9 knights gathered in the heart of the ancient city, beneath the golden light of dawn. Led by Hugues de Payens and his loyal companion, Godfrey de Saint-Omer, they took a vow that would echo across centuries. Before the Patriarch of Jerusalem, they swore an oath of chastity, poverty, and obedience. But more importantly, they pledged to defend the pilgrims who risked everything to walk where Christ once walked. What the world didn't know was that this brotherhood was more than a military force. It was the birth of a mystery. They were few, but their purpose was vast. Their headquarters were established in the ruins of the Temple of Solomon, a site already drenched in legend. The Crusaders believed it to be the very place where the Ark of the Covenant had once rested, where the divine presence had touched the earth. Yet the Templars did more than guard those sacred stones. They dug beneath them. Chronicles hint at secret excavations carried out under cover of night. What were they searching for in the catacombs of a fallen temple? Ancient scrolls? Hidden treasures? Or perhaps a revelation that could alter the destiny of the church itself? Some historians speak of ancient manuscripts, remnants of the Essenes or early Gnostic sects, that might have contained teachings suppressed since the dawn of Christianity. Whatever they found there, when the 9 knights emerged from the shadows, they carried with them more than relics. They carried power. Within a few short years, the small brotherhood became a recognized order of the church. In 1129, the Council of Troyes granted papal approval, and the Knights of the Temple became the sacred sword of Christendom. Their symbol, a red cross on a white mantle, became the mark of divine warriors, feared by enemies and revered by kings. But behind the holy image lay something more complex. The Templars did not answer to any monarch or noble. They reported only to the Pope. They were untouchable. This independence allowed them to expand swiftly, establishing commanderies across Europe and fortresses in the east. With every castle built, every relic protected, their wealth and influence multiplied. The Templars were no longer a handful of soldiers. They had become a network, a living empire of faith and discipline. They controlled trade routes, minted their own coins, and created the first international system of banking. Pilgrims could deposit gold in Paris and retrieve it in Jerusalem, marked only by a coded parchment that no thief could decipher. But while the world saw a righteous army, the church began to sense a quiet rebellion. These knights lived under vows of humility, yet wielded the riches of nations. They fought for the cross but kept their secrets in silence. And beneath their temples, cryptic symbols began to appear. Circles, stars, and patterns drawn from ancient geometry that no monk could explain. Some whispered that the Templars were no longer servants of Rome, but custodians of something older, something that predated even Christianity. Their understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and sacred architecture surpassed that of the scholars of their time. Cathedrals inspired by their designs rose like stone prayers across Europe, each one a map of heaven carved into earth. The church called it divine inspiration, but the whispers grew louder. What had these men learned beneath the Temple of Solomon? By the middle of the 12th century, the world saw them as invincible, soldiers of God blessed by heaven itself. Yet in the dark corridors of power, a seed of doubt had been planted. What began as an army born in faith was slowly becoming an enigma wrapped in silence and strength. The church had created its most powerful ally, but also unknowingly its greatest threat. Barely a century after their humble beginnings in the ruins of Solomon's Temple, the Knights Templar had transformed from a handful of warriors into a force that rivaled kingdoms. Europe, fractured and weary from endless wars, now bowed before the red cross that fluttered on their white mantles. Their castles stood like stone giants across the continent, fortresses of faith and fear, connected by a web of loyalty that reached from the sands of Jerusalem to the cold shores of England. The order's discipline was unmatched, their wealth unfathomable, and their influence untouchable. They were monks who prayed by candlelight, yet wielded armies that could crush nations. To many, they were the very embodiment of God's will on earth. To others, they were the shadow of a new kind of power, one that answered to no throne but their own. Through divine endorsement, the Templars gained privileges that no mortal order had ever possessed. Papal bulls granted them total independence from local laws, taxes, and authority. They could cross borders freely, communicate in secret codes, and protect their riches under the seal of the church. It was an empire without a crown, built on trust, fear, and the unshakable conviction that their mission was sacred. Yet while kings struggled to keep their coffers full, the Templars' wealth grew endlessly. They created a system of financial exchange centuries ahead of its time. Merchants, nobles, and pilgrims could deposit their fortune in one commandery and withdraw it thousands of miles away. Their network of treasuries became the spine of medieval commerce, the birth of modern banking. With gold flowing through their hands like a river of divine favor, the knights became the financiers of kings, lending fortunes to those who wore crowns and commanding respect from those who feared debt more than sin. But money was only the visible face of their empire. Their true strength lay in the invisible, knowledge. The Templars were not only warriors, they were engineers, architects, mathematicians, and sailors. They built roads, ports, and fortresses that still defy time. Their architectural designs reflected patterns of sacred geometry, circles and triangles believed to mirror divine creation itself. Cathedrals such as Chartres, Notre Dame, and Rosslyn Chapel bear the unmistakable imprint of Templar influence, where every stone seems to whisper a hidden message. Some scholars claim these designs encoded spiritual truths, maps of enlightenment disguised as art. Whether by divine inspiration or secret wisdom, the order had learned to speak the language of God through architecture. Their influence spread across continents and into the hearts of men. Kings sought their counsel. Popes relied on their armies. Even rival orders respected their strength. Yet behind their growing prestige, whispers persisted. Rumors of rituals conducted in secrecy, of oaths whispered in Latin under candlelight, of symbols that did not belong to Christianity, but to something older, something heretical. It was said that their initiation ceremonies involved denying Christ 3 times, spitting upon the cross, and worshipping a mysterious head known as Baphomet. To the Church, these stories were poison. To the Templars, they were protection. Secrets guarded by fear last longer than truth exposed to light. The Red Cross became more than a symbol. It became a warning. Wherever it flew, victory followed, but so did silence. Their ships crossed the Mediterranean, transporting relics, riches, and knowledge. Some say they reached lands unknown, mapping territories long before explorers set sail. Others believe they carried with them ancient manuscripts salvaged from the East, texts that spoke of Christ not as divinity incarnate, but as a man who revealed the divine spark within all humanity. If such a revelation were true, it would have shattered the foundation of the Church's authority. And perhaps that is why, even as the Templars built their empire of faith and fortune, the Vatican began to see not soldiers of God, but heretics cloaked in holiness. By the end of the 13th century, the Templars had become both the guardians of the cross and its greatest paradox. They had built an empire greater than any king's, but in their greatness they had crossed an invisible line, one that separated service from sovereignty. Their wealth bought them respect, their knowledge bought them fear, and their independence sealed their destiny. For in a world ruled by the Church, no man or order could serve 2 masters, and the Templars had unknowingly chosen the one that frightened Rome most, the truth. Beneath the sacred stones of Jerusalem, within the ancient ruins of Solomon's Temple, the Knights Templar unearthed something that would haunt the Church for centuries. What began as a mission of protection soon became an excavation cloaked in secrecy. While history records their vow to safeguard pilgrims, whispers tell another tale. That for 9 long years the Templars dug beneath the Temple Mount, uncovering relics and manuscripts that predated the Gospels themselves. When they finally emerged, they were no longer poor knights bound by faith. They were men who possessed a truth that transcended dogma. Something they had found in the darkness below had changed them forever. The Church feared knowledge it couldn't control, and the Templars now held precisely that. Some chroniclers claimed they discovered scrolls written in a forgotten Aramaic tongue, texts that spoke of Jesus not as a distant divinity, but as a master of sacred wisdom, a revealer of the divine spark within humanity. Others believed they uncovered hidden scriptures connected to the Essenes, the mystical sect that preserved teachings deliberately excluded from the New Testament. If the Templars truly read words that suggested salvation came not through the Church, but through personal awakening, it meant the entire structure of ecclesiastical power was built on fragile ground. That alone was enough to condemn them. But their discoveries were not limited to theology. They delved into the sciences of the ancients: geometry, alchemy, astronomy. They studied the relationships between matter and spirit, understanding creation as a divine equation written in the fabric of the universe. The cathedrals they built afterward were not merely houses of worship. They were living codices of this secret wisdom. Every spire pointed to a celestial coordinate. Every stained glass window filtered divine light through the geometry of the cosmos. Even the placement of these churches across Europe formed patterns invisible to the untrained eye, lines and intersections that mapped constellations, tracing what some scholars now call the Templar grid. The Church called it heresy. Modern science calls it genius. Their knowledge began to attract thinkers, philosophers, and mystics, men who saw beyond blind obedience and into the heart of creation. To protect what they'd learned, the Templars encoded their discoveries in symbols and rituals, hiding truth within allegory. The figure of Baphomet, the horned head they were later accused of worshipping, may not have been demonic at all. Many historians believe it was a cipher, derived from the word Mahomet or from the Arabic Abu Fihamet, meaning father of wisdom. The image represented balance, light and darkness, spirit and flesh, heaven and earth. It was the embodiment of divine duality, an idea older than Christianity itself. To the Church, this was blasphemy. To the Templars, it was revelation, the understanding that God existed not in separation, but in unity. Rumors spread across Europe like wildfire, tales of Templar rituals whispered in the dark, of initiates blindfolded, stripped of rank, and made to confront death before being reborn into the order. Outsiders saw heresy. Insiders saw transformation. These rites, they said, were designed to break pride, to dissolve illusion, and to awaken a knight to the inner kingdom of God. But such enlightenment made them dangerous, because a man who discovers the divine within himself cannot be controlled by fear of damnation, and a church built upon that fear could not allow such truth to live. The Templars had crossed an invisible boundary. They had touched forbidden knowledge, the kind that transforms faith into power. They had learned that the truest temple is not built of stone, but of spirit, and from that moment on, their destiny was sealed. The Church would no longer see them as protectors of Christ's legacy, but as rivals to his throne. The morning of October 13th, 1307, dawned cold and silent over France, a day that would forever be branded in history as the blackest Friday the world had ever known. While most of Paris still slept, the city was already surrounded by armed men. Under sealed orders from King Philip IV, thousands of soldiers marched through cobblestone streets, their torches flickering like the flames of an unholy judgment. As the bells tolled, they stormed the Templar commanderies, arresting every knight they could find. What had once been Europe's most honored order was now branded a nest of heretics. The betrayal was total. No warning, no trial, only iron, darkness, and fire. King Philip's reasons were cloaked in holiness, but rooted in greed. The monarch was drowning in debt to the Templars, and his jealousy burned hotter than his hunger for power. The Church, weakened and fearful of the order's independence, became his silent accomplice. Pope Clement V, cowardly, indebted, and controlled by the crown, signed the order of arrest. And so, under the guise of purging heresy, the king and the pope began what would become one of the most calculated purges in human history. The knights were shackled, their temples plundered, their sacred archives seized. The people who once bowed before them now spat at their feet, fed by rumors of blasphemy, idol worship, and unspeakable sins. The interrogations were not trials. They were tortures sanctified by religion. In the dungeons of Paris, screams echoed against the stone walls as inquisitors demanded confessions. Fire and blade replaced scripture and mercy. The knights were forced to deny Christ, to spit upon the cross, to admit to crimes they never committed. Some confessed only to end their agony. Others died before uttering a word. But even in torment, their silence carried defiance. Many refused to renounce their faith, believing that God himself would expose the corruption of their accusers. The Church called them heretics. History remembers them as martyrs. At the center of it all stood Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the order. Wise, resolute, and unbroken, he endured years of imprisonment while his brothers were executed one by one. The Church demanded submission, the king demanded confession, but de Molay gave them neither. Instead, on March 18, 1314, he was led to the Ile de la Cité in Paris, where a wooden pyre awaited him. Before the flames were lit, he stood tall, his voice rising above the crowd, as if echoing through eternity. He proclaimed the innocence of his brothers and cursed his persecutors, King Philip and Pope Clement, summoning them to God as judgment within a year. The onlookers trembled. Moments later, the fire roared, consuming the man but not his words. True to the curse, both the king and the pope were dead within months. Some called it coincidence, others called it divine retribution. As the flames died, Europe stood in silence. The Order of the Temple was officially dissolved. Their lands were seized, their libraries destroyed, and their symbols erased from every cathedral and coin. Yet their treasures were never found. Ships belonging to the Templars vanished from the port of La Rochelle, carrying with them gold, relics, and perhaps the secret that had condemned them. Some say they sailed to Scotland, others to Portugal, hiding their knowledge within secret brotherhoods that would later give birth to the Freemasons and other esoteric orders. But the true legacy of the Templars did not sink with their ships or burn with their flesh. It endured in whispers, in symbols carved into stone, in ideas too powerful to kill. The Church believed it had destroyed them. In truth, it had only set their legend ablaze. For in dying, the Templars achieved what every true knight sought: immortality, not of the body, but of the soul, carried through time by those who still seek the light beyond the lies of men. When the ashes of Jacques de Molay scattered in the wind that night, most believed it marked the end of the Knights Templar. But history has a strange way of protecting what it cannot explain. The Order's name may have been erased, their lands stolen, and their leaders burned. But the flame they carried, knowledge, power, and mystery, refused to die. Like a spark hidden beneath centuries of dust, it continued to glow in the minds of those who had sworn eternal brotherhood. As the Church celebrated its victory, whispers began to travel across Europe. The Templars live. Ships had vanished from the port of La Rochelle, loaded with treasures and documents never recovered. Monks disappeared from monasteries without a trace. And across the British Isles, strange men in white mantles were said to appear at night, swearing new oaths under unfamiliar symbols. The Order had not been destroyed. It had simply gone underground. Scotland, excommunicated and defiant against papal rule, became their first refuge. King Robert the Bruce, himself condemned by Rome, welcomed the fleeing knights. Some historians suggest that the Templars fought beside him at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, turning the tide in his favour and securing Scotland's independence. There, under the veil of secrecy, they began to rebuild, not as an army of knights but as a brotherhood of architects, builders and keepers of ancient wisdom. Their symbols began to reappear in carvings, cathedrals and secret societies, preserved by those who understood that ideas could outlive swords. From these hidden cells, the Templar seed would sprout again centuries later, under new names that still carried the same fire: the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati. Their architectural mastery became the signature of a silent movement. In cathedrals across Europe, in the intricate patterns of stained glass and the symmetry of Gothic arches, one can still see their hand. But more than stone, they shaped minds. The philosophies of enlightenment, the pursuit of individual awakening, and the belief that knowledge itself was divine, all bear the invisible mark of the Templar legacy. In an age when the Church demanded blind obedience, these secret heirs preached inner illumination. The compass and the square replaced the sword and the cross, but the message remained. The true temple of God is built within man. Their symbols survived as whispers of rebellion. The five-pointed star, the all-seeing eye, the rose entwined with the cross, each carried the DNA of Templar wisdom. Through centuries, these symbols traveled from hidden lodges to royal courts, influencing art, politics, and even the birth of nations. Some researchers trace the geometry of Washington, D.C.'s streets to Templar-inspired designs, encoded with celestial alignments that mirror the same mathematics found in Chartres Cathedral. The Red Cross, once banned, reappeared subtly in emblems, flags, and seals, its meaning transformed from military power to spiritual resilience. But the most profound survival of the Templar Order was not material, it was philosophical. They had planted in Western thought the revolutionary idea that divinity could be accessed without the Church, that enlightenment was not granted by priests, but discovered within oneself. This notion became the heartbeat of secret societies that arose during the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment. The Templars' belief in balance, discipline, and divine geometry inspired generations of thinkers who shaped the modern world. To the Church, they were ghosts of heresy. To history, they became the silent architects of reason. And yet, even now, their trail remains incomplete. Every few decades, a crypt is opened, a manuscript decoded, a symbol rediscovered. Each clue leads not to answers, but to deeper questions. Were the Freemasons their heirs or merely imitators? Did their treasure survive, hidden in the vaults of Rosslyn or under Portuguese cathedrals? Or was their true treasure never gold or relics at all, but the knowledge that man himself is the vessel of the divine? 7 centuries have passed, and still the Red Cross casts its shadow. The Templars may have vanished from history's pages, but they remain etched into its soul. They walk not as men of armor now, but as whispers in architecture, philosophy, and faith, an order that never truly died, only evolved. The Church silenced their voices, but it could never silence the idea that knowledge is the highest form of worship. What if the greatest heresy of the Knights Templar was not worshipping a false god, but understanding the true nature of the divine. What if their crime was discovering that God was never confined to cathedrals, nor limited to the authority of priests, but lived within every man and woman capable of awakening? This, according to whispers buried beneath centuries of censorship, was the truth the Templars carried, the revelation that terrified the Church more than any army ever could. For if every human soul could access the divine directly, the Church would no longer be the gatekeeper of salvation. It would lose its control, its wealth, and its reason to rule. And so the Templars were not just destroyed for power, they were erased for knowledge. The secret they discovered beneath the Temple of Solomon was not a relic, but a realization. Some claim it was a collection of scrolls written by early followers of Christ, revealing a message untainted by politics or fear, a gospel of freedom, not submission. It spoke of the divine as energy, of the soul as eternal, of humanity as the true image of God. The Templars, disciplined soldiers of faith, studied these teachings in secret, understanding that true holiness was not submission to a hierarchy, but the awakening of inner light. That belief turned them into heretics in the eyes of those who sought to control faith. For the Church, their discovery was not just dangerous, it was catastrophic. From this understanding came their strange rituals, their symbols, their silence. Every oath taken in candlelit chambers, every initiation was not rebellion, it was remembrance. The initiation ceremonies that the Church later demonized as blasphemous were in truth acts of inner rebirth. The blindfold symbolized ignorance, the kiss of peace represented spiritual unity, and the denial of the cross was never about rejecting Christ. It was about transcending symbols to find the living truth behind them. They believed the real temple was not of stone but of spirit, built within each awakened heart. In that revelation, the Templars found a freedom no king or pope could ever take. The Church, sensing the threat, began to weave a narrative of corruption around them. To protect its authority, it turned enlightenment into sin and knowledge into heresy. It declared war on the soul's independence. The same institution that preached humility feared losing its dominion over the faithful. The Templars' gospel of inner illumination would have shattered centuries of fear-based control. And so, they were silenced, not because they denied Christ, but because they discovered him in a way the Church could not own. Centuries later, fragments of their wisdom would resurface, hidden in alchemical texts, in the writings of mystics, in the teachings of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. Their symbols, once condemned, became blueprints for spiritual liberation. The compass for balance, the square for integrity, the light for truth. Even the image of Baphomet, misunderstood and demonized, represented unity. Male and female, heaven and earth, human and divine. The Templars had touched the essence of God's paradox, that light cannot exist without shadow, and salvation without knowledge is merely submission. This was the secret the Church feared most, the idea that the divine spark burns within every soul, waiting to be realized. That heaven is not a promise for the obedient, but a state achieved by the awakened. It was this truth that made the Templars immortal, even in death. For while their bodies turned to ash, their revelation became eternal, a flame that no dogma could extinguish. And so their legacy endures, in every mind that questions, in every spirit that seeks, in every heart that refuses to surrender truth for comfort. The Church may have erased their names, but it could never erase the awakening they ignited. For in the end, the Templars did not die defending a relic. They died defending enlightenment itself. 7 centuries have passed since the last flames devoured Jacques de Molay upon the banks of the Seine. Yet the fire that consumed his flesh could not extinguish the light of what he and his brothers had awakened. History may have tried to bury their truth beneath ashes and fear, but the human spirit has a way of preserving what is eternal. The Knights Templar no longer walk the earth in armor and steel, yet their presence lingers in the silence of cathedrals, in the geometry of sacred architecture, in the compass of Freemasons, and in every heart that still seeks the courage to question what is forbidden. They were declared heretics, yet they carried a revelation so profound that even death could not silence it. The divine spark lives not in temples or thrones, but within the soul of every man and woman who dares to awaken. Their story is not just about faith, It is about rebellion against ignorance. They rose in an age when obedience was worship, when questioning was sin, and they dared to search for God not in dogma, but in truth. For that, they were hunted, tortured, erased. But what their persecutors never understood is that ideas cannot be burned. Knowledge cannot be chained. Light cannot be killed by those who dwell in darkness. Every generation since has felt their echo, in every act of courage that defies tyranny, in every thinker who refuses to kneel before false authority, in every dreamer who believes that truth, no matter how forbidden, must always rise again. When Jacques de Molay raised his voice before the flames and cursed his betrayers, he was not speaking vengeance, he was prophesying justice. And history proved him right. Both the king and the pope met their deaths within the year, while the name of the Templars became legend. From the secret lodges of Europe to the halls of enlightenment, their philosophy continued to shape civilization. Their message whispered across time. The true temple of God is not built by hands, but by hearts illuminated by wisdom. The Templars were the architects of that unseen temple, laying its foundation in the human soul. And that is why, even now, the Church's attempt to erase them has become the greatest monument to their endurance. The modern world, though far removed from swords and crusades, still walks within the shadow of their revelation. In science, art, and philosophy, their pursuit of hidden truth endures. The compass that once guided their ships now guides minds toward discovery. The red cross that once marked their mantle now symbolizes the eternal struggle between truth and fear. The Templars remind us that faith without knowledge becomes submission, and knowledge without spirit becomes arrogance. But when both unite, when the heart and mind walk together, humanity becomes divine. And perhaps that was the greatest secret of all, that the power we seek in heaven already burns within us. The Templars knew this, they died for it. And their silence became a language that still speaks to those who listen. Every time a person dares to question what they were told to believe, every time a seeker chooses truth over comfort, every time a soul looks within instead of above, the order of the temple rises again. Their bodies may be dust, but their creed is eternal, written not in scripture, but in the essence of enlightenment itself. So when you hear the echo of the past, when you see the cross carved into ancient stone, remember, it is not a relic of superstition, but a symbol of awakening. The Templars' legacy was never about gold or relics. It was about humanity's right to seek the divine without chains. And that legacy, no matter how many centuries pass, will remain immortal, because truth once touched can never be forgotten. Chamada para ação. If this story awakened something within you, if the fire of the Templars still burns in your curiosity, then keep it alive. Share this revelation, spread their truth, and let the world remember what was forbidden to be known. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts below, and join this brotherhood of seekers who refuse to let history be written only by the victors. Because 700 years later, the Church's silence still echoes. But our voices can make the truth rise once more.